I am Joshua, 35 years old, and my own brother invited me to his engagement dinner on the condition that I pretend to be a complete stranger. Before I tell you about the moment his future father-in-law exposed his lies and ruined his perfect life right in front of everyone, let me know where you are watching from in the comments. I remember the exact moment my life shifted permanently. It was a late Tuesday evening, just 3 days before my older brother Elijah's grand engagement dinner. I was sitting alone in my chambers at the courthouse. The building was completely silent, save for the low hum of the air conditioning unit. I had just finished reviewing a massive stack of legal briefs, rubbing my tired eyes and looking forward to heading home to a quiet apartment and a hot meal. That was when my cell phone vibrated against the heavy oak wood of my desk. I picked it up, expecting a message from my clerk about the next day's docket, or perhaps a mundane reminder from my calendar. The screen illuminated the dark room, showing a text message from Elijah. I swiped open the notification, assuming he was sending over the final details for the dinner on Friday. Maybe a reminder about the dress code or the parking situation at the Union Club, an ultra-exclusive venue he had been bragging about booking for months. Instead, the words staring back at me made the blood in my veins run absolutely cold. The message read, "Hey Josh, you can still come to the dinner on Friday with Sophia's family. But listen, do me a massive favor. Do not mention that you are my brother. Just say we know each other from around town. Her dad is a federal judge, and honestly, having you bring up your courthouse job is just going to be embarrassing for me. Keep a low profile. Thanks." I did not blink. I sat there in the quiet glow of my desk lamp and read the message a second time. Then a third time. The words did not change. The sheer, unapologetic audacity of the request hung in the air like foul smoke. He was not asking me to avoid a controversial topic. He was not asking me to dress nicely. He was asking me to erase my own existence. He was demanding that I deny my own bloodline, my own parents, and my own identity, all so he could look a little more impressive in front of a man he was desperate to please. I placed the phone face down on the desk. I did not throw it against the wall. I did not scream. I just gripped the edge of my desk until my knuckles turned completely white. A sharp, familiar ache settled deep inside my chest. It was the ache of a lifetime spent being pushed aside. A few minutes later, the phone buzzed again. An incoming call. The caller ID flashed my mother's name, Helen. I knew exactly why she was calling. She was the cleanup crew. She was the one who always smoothed over Elijah's cruelty by framing it as a necessary sacrifice for the greater good of the family. I cleared my throat, forcing my voice to remain perfectly level, and answered the call. "Hello, Mom. Joshua, honey," she started. Her voice carried that sickly sweet, incredibly careful tone she always utilized when she wanted me to accept something deeply insulting without making a fuss. "I was just talking to Elijah, and he mentioned he sent you a quick text about Friday night. I just want to make sure you understand where we are coming from. This is a very big night for him. A crucial night. Sophia's family comes from serious prestige. We just do not want anything to complicate his image." "Complicate his image?" I asked. My voice sounded hollow, echoing slightly in the quiet chambers. "Mom, he is asking me to pretend I am not his brother. He is asking me to walk into a room and deny that I belong to my own family." My mother sighed sharply into the receiver. It was her signature sound of deep irritation. "Oh, Joshua, please do not be so dramatic. It is just for one single evening. You have always been the difficult one about these things. Elijah has a major promotion coming up at his corporate law firm, and marrying Sophia cements his status in that world. You know how important appearances are to these people. We have already arranged everything. We are having the staff seat you at a smaller table in the back of the room, right near the kitchen service doors. It will be much more comfortable for you there anyway. You will not have to make awkward small talk with her father." She did not even pause to let me respond. She just rattled off the time I needed to arrive, reminded me to wear a dark suit, and hung up the phone. I sat in the overwhelming silence of my office for a very long time, I looked out the window at the streetlights of the city flickering to life against the dark sky. For 35 years, I had accepted my designated role as the background character in Elijah's magnificent, carefully curated play. I had swallowed the insults, the dismissals, and the blatant favoritism because I believed that keeping the peace was what a good son was supposed to do. But looking down at the dark screen of my phone, something fundamental broke inside of me. A new, freezing cold resolve washed over my entire body. I stood up, walked over to the small coat closet in my office, and looked at my tailored black suit hanging there. I was not going to stay home. I was not going to give them the satisfaction of my absence. I was going to attend that dinner. I was going to show up exactly on time, sit exactly where they wanted me to sit, and watch them build their pathetic house of cards. What my family completely failed to understand was that the man they were so desperately trying to impress would know exactly who I was the very second he laid eyes on my face. If you want to understand how a mother could comfortably ask her youngest son to hide near the kitchen doors like a shameful secret, you have to understand the toxic foundation my family was built upon. From the moment I was old enough to form memories, the dynamic in our household was set in solid stone. There was Elijah, the undisputed golden child, and then there was Joshua, the spare part. The disparity became glaringly obvious when I was 14 years old. My grandfather passed away, and after a somber funeral, the family gathered to discuss his estate. There was a modest inheritance left behind. My parents, Robert and Helen, did not hesitate for a single second. They took every penny of that inheritance, combined it with their own life savings, and poured it directly into a massive college fund exclusively for Elijah. They bought him a brand new, gleaming car the week he turned 18. They paid exorbitant fees for his private tutors, sent him to elite summer debate camps, and eventually covered his incredibly expensive university tuition without a single complaint. They built a golden runway for him, ensuring he would never have to stumble or struggle. When it was my turn to graduate high school, the financial well was completely dry. I remember standing in the kitchen, holding my acceptance letter to a good state university. My father patted me firmly on the shoulder and gave me a tight smile. "Joshua, you are a tough kid. You will figure it out. We just need to make sure Elijah gets on his feet right now. He has big things ahead of him." So I figured it out. I did not get a car. I walked 2 miles through rain and snow to work long shifts at a local diner, coming home smelling like stale grease and strong coffee. I enrolled in a community college because that was the absolute limit of what I could afford on my own. I worked nights, weekends, and holidays while my peers were out partying. I took out crushing student loans to eventually transfer to a 4-year university, and then pushed myself even harder to get through law school. I never asked my parents for a single dime, and they never once offered to help. Elijah, meanwhile, coasted through life on his natural charm and the invisible safety net my parents had meticulously woven for him. He became a corporate lawyer, spending his days shaking hands on pristine golf courses and boasting loudly about his massive starting salary. He wore custom-tailored suits, slicked his hair back, and drove a leased luxury sports car that he likely could not actually afford without stretching his credit to the absolute limit. I took a vastly different, much harder path. Straight out of law school, I became a public defender. I survived on a miserable, barely livable salary, fighting tooth and nail in messy, heartbreaking, and chaotic cases. I dealt with vicious custody battles, tragic family disputes, and desperate people who had absolutely no one else in their corner. It was grueling, soul-crushing work that kept me awake at night, but it taught me the actual value of justice. My family found my career choice utterly laughable. At our awkward Thanksgiving dinners, Elijah would swirl his expensive red wine in his glass, flash a condescending smirk, and say loudly across the table, "So, Josh, still defending the local trash down at the precinct? Let me know when you get tired of the charity work and want a real job. I might be able to get you an interview in our mailroom." My parents would usually chuckle softly, sipping their drinks and looking at me with a mixture of pity and mild embarrassment. I never argued with them. I never raised my voice. I just kept my head down, ate my food, and focused on my goals. Eventually, I transitioned to the prosecutor's office, taking on highly complex cases involving corrupt politicians and massive corporate fraud rings. I built a reputation for being relentless and incredibly thorough. That was when my work caught the eye of Chief Justice Samuel. Samuel was one of the sharpest, most intimidating legal minds in the entire state. He was a man who commanded absolute silence when he walked into a room. Samuel became my mentor. He did not care about my last name, my lack of family wealth, or the cheap suits I wore in my early 20s. He cared about my mind, my work ethic, and my absolute refusal to back down from the truth, no matter how powerful the defendant was. Under his strict guidance, and after a decade of relentless, exhausting grinding, I was appointed as a judge. I became one of the youngest sitting judges on the bench in our district. But to my family, I was still just Joshua who works down at the courthouse. I never corrected their assumptions. I learned very early in life that if arrogant people want to deeply underestimate you, the absolute smartest thing you can do is let them. They never bothered to ask about the specifics of my career, so I never offered the details. They simply assumed I was fetching coffee, filing paperwork, or pushing papers for some municipal clerk. They had absolutely no idea who I had become. And that arrogant assumption was about to become the single most expensive mistake my brother would ever make in his entire life. The morning after receiving that vile text message from Elijah, I had a scheduled meeting with Chief Justice Samuel. His office was a massive, imposing room located on the top floor of the courthouse. The walls were lined from floor to ceiling with heavy, leather-bound legal volumes. The air always smelled faintly of old paper and strong black coffee. Samuel was a man who did not waste words. He looked up from a thick stack of legal briefs as I walked through his heavy wooden door, his incredibly sharp eyes catching something different in my posture immediately. "You look like a man who is preparing for an execution, Joshua," Samuel said, his deep voice rumbling in the quiet room. He set his gold fountain pen down carefully on his desk. "What is on your mind? You are usually much more focused than this." I walked over and sat in the heavy leather chair across from him. I let out a long, slow breath. I rarely spoke about my personal life or my family dynamics at work, but Samuel was the closest thing to a real, supportive father figure I had ever known. I reached into my jacket pocket, pulled out my cell phone, opened the message from my brother, and slid the device across the polished mahogany desk. Samuel picked up his reading glasses, perched them on the bridge of his nose, and looked at the screen. He read the text. The silence in the large office stretched out, growing thick and incredibly heavy. I watched his eyes scan the words a second time. When he finally looked up and took off his glasses, his expression was completely unreadable. It was the same stony face he wore when sentencing hardened criminals. "Your brother," Samuel said slowly, enunciating every single syllable with deadly precision, "wants you to deny your own bloodline because he is terrified that you will embarrass him in front of his future father-in-law." "Yes, sir," I replied, keeping my voice perfectly steady, refusing to let the hurt show. "My mother called shortly after to confirm the arrangement. They have assigned me a specific seat in the back of the dining room, right next to the kitchen service doors, so I do not disrupt their networking opportunities." Samuel leaned back in his large leather chair, steepling his fingers together and resting his chin on them. "And who exactly is this federal judge your brother is so desperate to impress that he would erase his own sibling?" "Christopher," I said simply. "Judge Christopher from the federal circuit." For a full 5 seconds, Samuel did not move a single muscle. Then, a slow, incredibly sharp smile spread across his weathered face. It was not a warm, friendly smile. It was the dangerous smile of a seasoned predator that had just spotted a very foolish, unaware prey wandering into its territory. He let out a low, deep chuckle that echoed ominously in the quiet office. "Christopher," Samuel repeated, almost tasting the name on his tongue. "Joshua, do you realize exactly who that man is?" "I know of him, of course," I said, slightly confused by Samuel's reaction. "He is highly respected, known for being incredibly tough on corporate corruption and white-collar crime." "He does not just respect the law, Joshua," Samuel said, leaning forward abruptly, his eyes burning with intense, focused amusement. He respects you. Christopher and I had a long dinner together just 2 months ago. We spent half the evening discussing your recent ruling on the Henderson corporate fraud case. He has cited your written opinions in his own public remarks multiple times over the last year. He explicitly told me he thinks you are one of the brightest, most capable young minds currently sitting on the bench. I sat back in my chair, the air suddenly rushing out of my lungs as the reality of the situation hit me. My brother, in his desperate, pathetic attempt to look important and wealthy, was trying to hide the one person in his entire family who actually commanded the genuine respect of the man he was trying to woo. Elijah was building a massive lie, completely unaware that he had handed me the exact weapon needed to destroy it. Samuel stood up from his desk and walked over to the coat rack in the corner of the room. What time is this engagement dinner on Friday? 7 o'clock in the evening, I said, still processing the massive shift in power dynamics. Good, Samuel said, pulling on his tailored suit jacket and adjusting his cuffs. Wear your absolute best suit. I will pick you up at my car at 6:30 sharp. I would not miss this dinner for anything in the world. It is time your family learns exactly who they have been pushing around. I realized right then, looking at Samuel's determined face, that I was no longer walking into a humiliating trap. I was walking into a devastating reckoning. I was finally going to let the truth do the talking. Friday evening arrived with a biting, bitter chill in the Boston air. Exactly at 6:30, Chief Justice Samuel's sleek Blacktown car pulled up to the curb outside my apartment building. I stepped out into the cold, smoothing the lapels of my dark, perfectly tailored suit, and climbed into the back seat. We did not speak much during the ride through the city traffic toward the Union Club. We did not need to exchange words. The air inside the car was highly charged, thick and heavy with the tense anticipation of a massive storm about to break over an unsuspecting crowd. The Union Club was exactly the kind of pretentious, old-money establishment that Elijah deeply idolized. It was all dark mahogany paneled walls, massive crystal chandeliers that cost more than a house, oil paintings of stern-faced founders, and the quiet, muffled sound of extreme wealth. We checked our heavy winter coats at the front desk and walked slowly toward the private dining room overlooking the glittering city lights. As we approached the grand entrance of the dining room, I immediately spotted my family. My parents were standing near the absolute center of the room, holding delicate champagne flutes and laughing entirely too loudly at a joke someone else had just made. Elijah stood right next to them, his arm wrapped tightly and possessively around Sophia's waist. He was wearing his absolute best, most arrogant smile, scanning the room with the smug satisfaction of a man who believed he had finally arrived at the top of the social ladder. The very second Elijah's eyes landed on me walking through the double doors, the fake smile instantly vanished from his face. His jaw locked so hard I could almost hear his teeth grind from across the room. He leaned in, whispered something hurriedly into Sophia's ear, let go of her waist, and practically sprinted across the thick, expensive carpet to intercept me before I could get anywhere near the main tables. In his sheer panic, he did not even notice Chief Justice Samuel standing quietly just a half step behind my right shoulder. Elijah's panicked eyes were entirely focused on containing his biggest perceived problem. Me. "You are late," Elijah hissed under his breath, grabbing my elbow with a surprisingly hard, bruising grip. "And who the hell is this?" he asked, throwing a quick, dismissive glance at Samuel without bothering to actually look at the man's face. "A colleague," I said smoothly, forcefully pulling my arm out of his tight grip and smoothing my sleeve. Before Elijah could demand that Samuel leave, Sophia walked up behind him, her elegant evening gown rustling softly against the carpet. She had a very kind, intelligent face and sharp, observant eyes that seemed to take in every detail of the interaction. "Elijah," she said politely, her voice melodic, "aren't you going to introduce us?" Elijah swallowed hard. A visible bead of sweat formed at his hairline, catching the light from the chandeliers. He plastered on a completely fake, incredibly strained smile and turned to his fiancée. Sophia, darling, of course. This is Joshua. He helps out down at the courthouse. Does some administrative stuff. He is just an old acquaintance from town. He did not say the word, brother. He said those degrading words straight to my face, looking me right in the eye, daring me to contradict him. He erased my entire existence, our entire shared childhood, right there in the middle of the crowded room. I felt my jaw tighten involuntarily, but I kept my face an absolute mask of unreadable stone. It is very nice to meet you, Joshua, Sophia said warmly, extending her hand. I took it and shook it firmly. The pleasure is entirely mine, Sophia. Congratulations to you both. My mother, Helen, scurried over a second later, her anxious eyes darting nervously between me and the main table where Sophia's powerful parents were seated. Joshua, you made it. Come, let me show you to your seat right away. We want you to be perfectly comfortable out of the way of the main foot traffic. She herded me and Samuel away from the center of the room like we were stray dogs, leading us to a tiny, cramped table tucked completely in the back corner of the large hall. It was practically touching the heavy, swinging doors of the kitchen. Every single time a waiter rushed by with a tray of food, a blast of hot air and the smell of cooking grease hit the back of my neck. From this humiliating vantage point, however, I had a perfect, completely unobstructed view of the head table. I sat quietly and watched my brother sit down, puff out his chest like a proud peacock, and begin performing his sickeningly sweet routine for Judge Christopher. I sat down, carefully unfolded my crisp linen napkin, and placed it across my lap. Samuel sat directly across from me, his face calm but his eyes sharp. He signaled a passing waiter and ordered 2 glasses of neat scotch. They actually put you by the kitchen doors, Samuel murmured, his voice laced with a dangerous, quiet kind of fury. They wanted me out of sight and out of mind, I replied, watching my father lean over and pour expensive wine for Christopher with a sickeningly eager, submissive smile. Well, Samuel said, taking a slow sip of his scotch and staring directly at the head table with absolute focus. Let's see exactly how long their little fantasy lasts. The first course of the lavish dinner was cleared away by the silent waitstaff, and the large dining room settled into a low, comfortable hum of polite, wealthy conversation. That was the exact moment Judge Christopher pushed his chair back and stood up. It was apparently a long-standing tradition of his to walk around the room with his own glass, personally greeting every single guest table by table before the main course was served. From my dark corner in the back of the room, I watched him move methodically from table to table. He shook hands firmly, offered polite nods of acknowledgement, and exchanged brief, pleasant words with Elijah's extended family and friends. Elijah watched him like a hawk, following his future father-in-law's every move with shining eyes. Elijah looked absolutely thrilled, practically vibrating in his seat with overwhelming pride that this powerful man was commanding the room and, by extension, validating Elijah's new elevated status. Christopher slowly made his way toward the back of the expansive room. When he finally turned the corner and approached my tiny, drafty table near the kitchen doors, he had a polite, somewhat generic social smile plastered on his face, clearly expecting to greet a distant cousin or a minor coworker. Then he stopped. He froze completely, mid-step, his expensive leather shoe halting awkwardly on the carpet. The polite, generic smile vanished instantly from his face, replaced in a fraction of a second by a look of sheer, unadulterated shock. He blinked his eyes twice rapidly, as if trying to make absolutely sure his vision was not playing terrible tricks on him in the dim, atmospheric lighting of the club. "Sir," Christopher said, his deep, booming voice suddenly cutting clearly through the quiet, ambient chatter of the room. "Judge Joshua, I had absolutely no idea you would be in attendance here tonight." The entire dining room went dead silent. It was the specific kind of heavy, suffocating silence where you can hear a pin drop on a thick carpet. At the head table across the room, Elijah's expensive wine glass stopped dead halfway to his mouth. My mother's face completely drained of all color, turning a horrifying, sickly ashen gray in an instant. Christopher stepped forward quickly, completely ignoring the fact that I was seated by the noisy kitchen doors, and extended both of his hands to enthusiastically and respectfully shake mine. "It is an absolute honor and a privilege to finally meet you in person, Judge. Chief Justice Samuel has told me brilliant, incredible things about your work. I have read your recent written opinions on the Henderson corporate liability cases twice over. Your legal reasoning is some of the finest, most airtight work I have seen in a decade on the bench." I stood up slowly, maintaining my composure, and shook his hand firmly. "Thank you very much, Judge Christopher. That means a great deal coming from a man of your immense standing and experience." Suddenly, Elijah appeared right beside us. He had practically sprinted across the room. His face was flushed a deep, panicked, mottled red, and he was breathing quickly, his chest heaving under his expensive suit jacket. Wait, Judge? Christopher, there has been a massive misunderstanding here. This is just Joshua. He just does minor administrative work down at the local courthouse. He is just an acquaintance of mine. There must be some confusion." Christopher turned his head slowly to look at my brother, his thick, graying eyebrows furrowing in deep, genuine confusion. "An acquaintance? Minor administrative work? Elijah, what on earth are you blabbering about? This man is the Honorable Judge Joshua. He is one of the youngest, sharpest, and most highly respected judges currently sitting in our entire state district." Elijah's mouth opened wide, but absolutely no sound came out. He looked at me, then looked at Christopher, panting slightly like a fish violently pulled out of the water and gasping for air on a dry dock. That was the precise moment Chief Justice Samuel decided to stand up from his chair. He did not rush. He moved with the slow, terrifying, deliberate grace of an executioner stepping calmly up to the chopping block. He reached into the inside pocket of his tailored jacket, pulled out his smartphone, and tapped the screen to wake it up. "Actually, Christopher," Samuel said, his deep voice carrying effortlessly across the completely silent, stunned dining room. "Elijah knows exactly who Joshua is. He knows perfectly well that Joshua is a sitting judge. He just desperately did not want you to know." Samuel turned the bright phone screen directly toward Christopher's face. "This is the text message Elijah sent directly to Joshua just 3 days ago, dictating the terms of his attendance tonight." Samuel did not paraphrase a single word. He read the text out loud, his voice booming with undeniable authority, echoing off the mahogany walls. "Do not mention that you are my brother. Just say we know each other from around town. Her dad is a federal judge, and having you bring up your courthouse job is just going to be embarrassing for me." When Samuel finished reading the final word, the silence that followed was physically suffocating. Christopher stared at the glowing phone screen for a long moment. Then he slowly, deliberately turned his head to look directly at my brother. The warmth, the fatherly affection, and the respect in his eyes were entirely gone, replaced instantly by a gaze so cold and hard it could have shattered bulletproof glass. "You hid your own brother," Christopher said, his voice dropping to a dangerously low, furious whisper that somehow everyone could hear. "You put a highly respected sitting judge by the kitchen doors, and forced him to deny his own bloodline, because you arrogantly thought he was not good enough to sit with my family? This is a moment that changed everything, when I finally regained control of my life. Thank you for your patience in getting this far. You are amazing. Please help me like the video and leave a comment with the number 1 below so I know you've been with me this far. This will not only help more people find this story, but also let me know that my experiences are meaningful to someone. Your support is the biggest motivation for me to continue sharing the rest of this journey." No one in the room dared to move a single inch. My father sat frozen at the main table, his hands visibly trembling over his expensive, untouched plate of food. My mother looked like she was going to be physically sick right there on the expensive tablecloth. Elijah looked frantically around the room, his eyes darting wildly from face to face, desperately trying to find a friendly expression, trying to find a miraculous way out of the devastating trap he had meticulously built with his own 2 hands. "Christopher, please," I beg of you. It is not what it looks like, Elijah stammered, his voice cracking pathetically in the quiet room. I wanted the night to be absolutely perfect for Sophia. I wanted to make a flawless impression on you. Josh and we have a very complicated, difficult history. There is absolutely nothing complicated about this. Sophia's voice rang out. She walked over from the main table, her heels clicking sharply against the hardwood floorboarders, and stood right beside her father. She did not look sad. She did not have a single tear in her eyes. She looked absolutely furious. She looked at Elijah as if she was seeing a hideous stranger who had been wearing a very convincing mask for the past 2 years. You lied to me, Sophia said, her voice steady, cold, and razor-sharp. You looked me in the eyes and told me your brother was a total failure. You told me he was a lazy embarrassment who leached off your parents' goodwill. You did not just lie about his prestigious job. You lied about the fundamental core of who you are as a man. You are a coward. Sophia, baby, please listen to me, Elijah pleaded, reaching out a trembling hand to touch her arm. She stepped back instantly, swatting his hand away violently as if his very touch physically burned her skin. With a swift, fluid, and incredibly final motion, she reached down to her left hand. She gripped the massive, incredibly expensive diamond engagement ring and pulled it forcefully off her finger. She did not throw it in his face. She did not scream or cause a hysterical scene. She just dropped it directly onto my small wooden table. It hit the hard surface with a sharp, heavy click that echoed loudly in my ears, sounding like a judge's gavel slamming down to deliver a final sentence. We are done, Sophia said coldly. Do not ever contact me again. Elijah's eyes widened in sheer, absolute panic. He spun around wildly and lunged toward me, grabbing the lapels of my suit jacket with both of his shaking hands. Joshua, please, you have to tell them. Tell them it is just a stupid misunderstanding. Tell them we joke like this. Please, can we just go outside and talk for 1 second? Let's fix this mess in private. I looked down at his desperate, sweating hands clutching my dark suit. I did not push him away aggressively. I did not yell. I just stared at him with absolute, freezing, terrifying calm. I let him feel the full weight of the moment. No, I said, my voice clear and echoing in the completely silent room. You were perfectly comfortable humiliating me in front of a room full of wealthy strangers. You were perfectly comfortable hiding me by the kitchen doors like garbage. You can hear my final answer right here in front of all of them, too. I have absolutely nothing left to say to you. You brought this entirely on yourself. Elijah let go of my jacket instantly, stumbling backward as if my words had physically struck him in the chest. He looked completely broken, his arrogant facade shattered into a million unfixable pieces. Judge Christopher put a firm, protective hand on his daughter's shoulder. He looked fiercely across the room at my parents, who were actively shrinking down into their expensive dining chairs, trying to become invisible. This dinner is officially over. There will be no wedding. The venue will be canceled tomorrow morning. And Elijah, listen to me very carefully. If I ever see you near my daughter, or anywhere near my family ever again, I promise you, you will not just lose an engagement ring. You will lose your entire legal career. I will personally see to it. Christopher turned back to me, his expression softening slightly as he offered a stiff, incredibly respectful nod. Judge Joshua, Chief Justice Samuel, I deeply apologize that you were subjected to this vile display of character. Have a good, safe evening. Christopher and Sophia turned on their heels and walked straight out of the dining room, their heads held high, their posture rigid. The rest of their extended family immediately stood up in silent unison, gathered their belongings, and followed them out the door, leaving behind a pathetic trail of half-empty wine glasses and completely untouched gourmet food. Elijah collapsed heavily into a nearby chair, burying his flushed, sweaty face in his shaking hands. A low, pathetic sob escaped his throat. My mother started crying quietly, dabbing her eyes with a linen napkin, finally realizing that her golden child's world had just violently collapsed. My father just sat there, staring blankly at the wall, speechless. I did not stay a moment longer to watch them mourn the sudden, violent death of their delusions. I calmly picked up my coat from the back of the chair. Samuel stood beside me, quietly buttoning his suit jacket. We walked together out of the Union Club, leaving my ruined family sitting in the deafening silence of their own making. Stepping out onto the pavement, the cold, crisp Boston night air hit my face. I took a deep breath. For the first time in 35 years, my lungs felt completely clear. The heavy, suffocating weight of seeking their toxic approval was finally gone, left behind forever in that dining room, sitting right next to a discarded diamond ring. The morning after the disastrous dinner at the Union Club, I woke up in my own bed just before sunrise. For the first few seconds, my mind was entirely blank, caught in that peaceful, quiet space between sleep and waking. Then, the memories of the previous night came rushing back in a tidal wave. The heavy mahogany doors, the tiny table by the kitchen, the absolute shock on Judge Christopher's face, the terrifyingly cold tone of Chief Justice Samuel's voice as he read that text message aloud. And finally, the sharp, defining click of Sophia's diamond engagement ring hitting the wooden table. I sat up slowly and swung my legs over the edge of the bed. I braced myself for the familiar wave of anxiety, the heavy guilt that usually accompanied any conflict with my family. For 35 years, my nervous system had been wired to absorb their anger, to internalize their disappointment, and to figure out how I could make myself smaller to fix whatever mess my brother had created. But as I sat there in the quiet gray light of the early Boston morning, waiting for the panic to hit, something incredible happened. The panic never came. Instead, I felt an overwhelming, profound sense of lightness. It felt as though a massive, suffocating physical weight had been surgically removed from my chest while I slept. I stood up, walked into the kitchen, and started brewing a pot of strong black coffee. The smell of the roasted beans filled the small apartment, grounding me in reality. I finally walked over to the kitchen counter and picked up my cell phone. The screen was absolutely flooded with notifications. There were 47 missed calls, 14 from my mother, Helen, 10 from my father, Robert, and 23 from Elijah. Below the missed calls was a string of frantic, increasingly unhinged text messages and voicemails. I poured my coffee, sat down at the kitchen island, and deliberately pressed play on the first voicemail. It was from my mother. "Joshua." Her voice crackled through the speaker, sounding breathless and utterly panicked. "Joshua, pick up the phone right now. I cannot believe what you just did. You ruined everything. You completely humiliated your brother in front of the most important people in his life. You could have just played along. You could have just pulled Christopher aside quietly. Why did you let Samuel do that? Elijah is in absolute pieces. Sophia will not answer his calls. You need to call her father right now. You need to use your position to fix this. Call us immediately." I deleted the voicemail without listening to the rest. I played the next one. It was my father. His voice was lower, rougher, carrying the heavy tone of a disappointed patriarch trying to wrangle a disobedient child. "Josh, this has gone way too far. Your mother is inconsolable. Elijah is having a complete breakdown in the living room. Family is family, Josh. You do not do this to your own blood. We gave you life. We raised you. You owe it to us to clean up this mess. Get down here right now so we can strategize how to win Sophia back." I deleted that one, too. Then, there was a message from Elijah. Started with heavy, ragged breathing. Josh, you vindictive, jealous loser. You planned this, didn't you? You brought Samuel on purpose to destroy my life because you have always been insanely jealous of me. You think you are so high and mighty in your cheap courthouse suit? You are nothing. You are going to call Christopher and tell him you exaggerated the whole thing. You are going to fix this, or I swear to God. The message cut off abruptly. I looked at the dark screen of my phone. There was no anger left in me. There was no sadness. There was just absolute, crystal-clear clarity. They were not sorry for the horrific way they had treated me. They were not experiencing a moment of profound self-reflection. They were only panicking because the protective bubble of lies they had built around their golden child had violently burst, and they expected the person they had thrown to the wolves to come back and stitch it together for them. I went into my phone settings. I selected my mother's contact, my father's contact, and Elijah's contact. With 3 simple taps of my finger, I blocked their phone numbers. I blocked their email addresses. I blocked them on every single platform available. Just like that, the chaotic noise they had brought into my life for 3.5 decades was silenced. Monday morning arrived, and I walked into the courthouse with a newfound spring in my step. The marble floors of the lobby seemed to shine a little brighter. The security guards nodded respectfully as I passed through the private entrance. I put on my black judicial robe, sat behind the heavy wooden bench in my courtroom, and focused entirely on the law. I listened to arguments, I read through complex case files, and I delivered rulings with a sharp, unclouded mind. I was exactly where I belonged, built by my own hands, standing on my own 2 feet. But while my life moved forward with steady, peaceful momentum, Elijah's carefully constructed world was violently imploding. The legal community in Boston is not as large as it seems from the outside. It is a tight-knit circle of judges, senior partners, and prosecutors who all attend the same charity galas, sit on the same advisory boards, and eat at the same exclusive steakhouses. Gossip in these circles travels faster than a wildfire, especially when it involves a spectacular public humiliation at a place like the Union Club. I heard the full story of Elijah's downfall about 2 weeks later. I was having a quick lunch at a deli near the courthouse with a young corporate lawyer named David. David occasionally worked with our office on complex financial regulations, but his primary job was as a junior associate at the exact same prestigious corporate law firm where my brother worked. David sat across from me, nervously tearing a paper napkin into tiny strips. He looked around the crowded deli before leaning in closely over his pastrami sandwich. "Judge," David started, his voice a low, conspiratorial whisper. "I do not know if you have heard the news, but I thought you should know. Things at the firm have been absolutely explosive regarding your brother." I took a slow sip of my iced tea and looked at him calmly. "I do not speak to Elijah, David. What happened?" David's eyes widened slightly at my calm demeanor, but he eagerly leaned in further to spill the details. "It happened last Thursday. You know, Elijah was up for a massive promotion, right? He was practically bragging in the break room that he was about to make junior partner. He was already talking about the massive salary bump and the corner office. He thought marrying Judge Christopher's daughter was the final key to locking the partners down." I nodded slowly, letting him continue. "Well, last Thursday morning, the 3 senior founding partners called Elijah into the main glass conference room. Everyone on the floor saw it happen. According to the executive assistant who was taking notes, the partners did not even ask him to sit down. The managing partner, Mr. Sterling, who, by the way, plays golf with Judge Christopher every single Sunday, looked Elijah dead in the eye and demanded an explanation for the rumors circulating about a certain dinner at the Union Club. I set my glass down, the ice clinking softly. The wheels of consequence were turning much faster than I had anticipated. "Elijah completely panicked," David continued, his voice hushed but practically buzzing with the drama of it all. "He tried to laugh it off. He tried to tell the partners it was just a silly family dispute blown out of proportion. But Sterling cut him off. Sterling told him that Judge Christopher had personally called the firm. Christopher did not demand that Elijah be fired, but he made it incredibly clear that he found Elijah's character to be fundamentally untrustworthy, deceptive, and completely lacking in moral integrity." David took a deep breath. Sterling looked at Elijah and said the most brutal thing I have ever heard in a corporate setting. He said, "Elijah, if you are comfortable lying about the existence of your own blood brother to a federal judge just to climb the social ladder, how on earth can we trust you not to lie to our billion-dollar clients? How can we trust you to uphold the ethical standards of this firm when you have no personal ethics to speak of?" "And then?" I asked, my voice remaining perfectly even, though a profound sense of justice was blooming in my chest. And then they fired him on the spot, David said, leaning back in his chair. They did not give him a severance package. They did not give him a month to find a new job. They told him his presence was a liability to their reputation. Security escorted him to his desk. I watched him pack his expensive desk toys, his framed diplomas, and his perfectly polished nameplate into a cheap cardboard box. He was sweating profusely. He would not look a single person in the eye as the security guards marched him to the elevator and sent him down to the lobby. He is completely blacklisted, Judge. No reputable corporate firm in the city is going to touch him after a character assassination like that from the senior partners. I thanked David for the lunch, paid the bill, and walked back to the courthouse. I did not feel a sense of vicious triumph, nor did I feel pity. I simply felt the heavy, undeniable truth of cause and effect. Elijah had spent his entire life valuing shallow appearances over genuine substance, and the moment the spotlight of truth hit him, the illusion evaporated, leaving absolutely nothing behind. But the collapse of his career was only the first domino to fall. Without the massive corporate salary, without the impending wedding to a wealthy heiress, the lavish lifestyle Elijah had built entirely on a foundation of credit and arrogance began to rapidly, violently unravel. Elijah lived in a stunning, ultra-modern penthouse apartment in one of the most expensive high-rises in the downtown district. The rent alone was staggering, a price he had justified by claiming it was necessary for entertaining powerful clients and his future in-laws. He drove a pristine, slate-gray Porsche 911, a vehicle he leased at a premium just to make sure the valet boys at the country clubs noticed him when he pulled up. He had convinced himself that he belonged to a class of people that he could not actually afford to be part of. And when the income vanished overnight, the creditors came calling with ruthless efficiency. A month after the dinner, the first major crack in his physical facade shattered. I did not hear about this from David. I happened to be walking back from a late dinner with Chief Justice Samuel near the financial district when we turned a corner and encountered a scene that felt almost perfectly scripted by a harsh universe. Parked illegally in front of a high-end coffee shop was a heavy-duty municipal tow truck. The flashing yellow lights cast long, spinning shadows against the brick buildings. The tow operator, a burly man in a neon vest, was efficiently securing heavy metal chains to the front axle of a very familiar, slate-gray Porsche 911. Standing on the sidewalk, illuminated by the harsh streetlights, was my brother. Elijah looked completely unrecognizable from the arrogant, polished man who had grabbed my arm at the Union Club. He was wearing wrinkled sweatpants and a stained hooded sweatshirt. His hair, usually slicked back to perfection, was a messy, unwashed bird's nest. He was frantically waving a piece of paper at the tow truck driver, his voice a desperate, pleading whine that echoed down the quiet street. "Please, man, you cannot take the car. I have the payment right here. I just need a few more days to clear the check. I need this car for interviews. Please, if you tow it, the bank is going to default the whole lease." The driver did not even look up. He just locked the winch, hit a lever on the side of the truck, and the shiny Porsche was unceremoniously yanked off the pavement, its alarm suddenly blaring into the night air. "Sir, take it up with the bank. I just have the repossession order," the driver said gruffly, climbing into the cab of his truck and slamming the door. Elijah stood on the curb, his hands pulling desperately at his own hair as he watched the symbol of his fake wealth being dragged down the street, the red taillights fading into the Boston traffic. Samuel and I stood quietly in the shadows of the building across the street. We did not cross over. We did not say a word to him. We just watched the absolute destruction of a man who had chosen vanity over his own family. "A hard lesson," Samuel murmured quietly, adjusting his coat collar against the wind. "The only kind he was ever going to understand," I replied, turning away from the scene and walking toward the subway station. As Elijah's life spiraled out of control, my parents grew increasingly frantic. Since I had blocked their phone numbers, they resorted to the only avenue left, the postal service. They began sending long, handwritten letters to my office at the courthouse. My clerk, knowing the situation, asked if I wanted them thrown directly into the shredder. For a few weeks I said yes. But eventually, one letter arrived in a thick, red envelope that caught my attention. It was entirely in my mother's cramped, anxious handwriting. I sat at my desk, broke the wax seal, and unfolded the heavy paper. It was a masterclass in emotional manipulation, a desperate attempt to rewrite history to suit her narrative. The letter spanned 4 full pages. She began by lamenting the utter devastation of the family unit. She wrote, in dramatic, underlined sentences, about how Elijah had lost his apartment and was currently sleeping on the sofa in their living room. Then came the guilt trip, weaponizing the past. Joshua, she wrote, you must understand the sacrifices we made. When your grandfather passed, we used his entire inheritance to build Elijah's college fund because we knew he had the potential to be a star. We gave him every advantage so he could lift this family up. And you tore it all down in one single, incredibly selfish evening. You let your pride destroy your brother's future. You must contact Judge Christopher immediately. You must tell him you forgive Elijah. You have the power to stop this bleeding. A good son does not abandon his family when they are down. I read the words, and a cold, grim smile touched my lips. She truly believed that my grandfather's inheritance, the money that should have been split between us, was rightfully given entirely to Elijah to make him a star. She truly believed that I was the villain for simply existing in the same room as the truth. I took a black pen, wrote the words "Return to sender," address unknown, across the front of the red envelope, and handed it back to my clerk. That was the absolute final communication I ever had with my mother. I realized that trying to explain reality to people who are entirely committed to their delusions is like trying to pour water into a glass that is already full of poison. The only thing you will accomplish is spilling the water. A few days later, a very different kind of letter arrived at my chambers. It was a small, elegant, cream-colored envelope. The handwriting on the front was sweeping, precise, and beautiful. There was no return address, but I recognized the thick, expensive stationery immediately. I opened it carefully with a letter opener. Inside was a single card. The message was concise, but it carried an immense, profound weight. Dear Judge Joshua, I am writing this not to apologize for the events that transpired, as neither of us are to blame for the actions of a coward, but to express my deepest, most genuine gratitude to you. For the past 2 years, I was completely blinded by a carefully constructed illusion. I was deeply in love with a man who simply did not exist. Seeing the absolute ease and the casual cruelty with which he attempted to erase your existence from the room opened my eyes permanently. If a man is willing to hide his own flesh and blood to serve his ego, there is no limit to what he would hide from a wife. You stood in that dining room with incredible quiet dignity, and your silence spoke louder than any warning ever could. You saved my life, Joshua. You saved me from a future built on lies. You saved me from waking up 10 years from now next to a stranger, facing a brutal divorce, fighting a vicious custody battle over children with a man who possesses absolutely no moral compass. I am forever grateful that the truth came to light before I tied my life to his sinking ship. I wish you nothing but the absolute best in your brilliant career. You are the kind of man your brother could only ever pretend to be. With the utmost respect, Sophia. I read the letter 3 times. A deep, settling peace washed over my entire being. I carefully placed the cream-colored card inside the top drawer of my desk, keeping it as a quiet reminder that sometimes, the most destructive storms are actually sent to clear the path for something much better. I went back to work. I put my head down, focused on my cases, and let the noise of my biological family fade entirely into the background noise of the city. I did not look back. I did not check up on Elijah. I did not wonder if my parents were doing well. I had finally learned the most difficult lesson of my adult life. You cannot heal in the exact same environment that made you sick. I had surgically removed the infection, and for the first time I was truly thriving. Exactly 1 year and 2 months after that fateful dinner at the Union Club, the alarm clock beside my bed buzzed to life at 5:30 in the morning. I reached over, silenced it, and lay on my back, watching the early morning sunlight filter through the blinds of my bedroom window. Today was not an ordinary day. Today was a day that validated every single late-night shift at the diner, every crippling student loan payment, every agonizing hour spent studying in the dim light of the public library, and every silent indignity I had suffered at the hands of my own family. I walked into the bathroom, turned on the bright overhead lights, and looked at myself in the mirror. There were a few more gray hairs at my temples than there had been a year ago, but the face looking back at me was relaxed, confident, and entirely at peace. I shaved carefully, taking my time, the warm water soothing my skin. I walked into my closet and pulled out a brand new suit. It was not a cheap, off-the-rack garment bought on a public defender's salary. 2 months prior, a vacancy had opened up on the state appellate court, a highly coveted, senior-level judicial seat that required a flawless record, immense legal knowledge, and the absolute respect of the legal community. My name had not just been quietly submitted. It had been aggressively championed by Chief Justice Samuel and strongly endorsed by Judge Christopher and his massive network of federal colleagues. The confirmation process had been grueling, demanding, and exactly the kind of rigorous intellectual challenge that I thrived on. When the final vote came through, confirming my appointment to the appellate court, I did not celebrate with expensive champagne or loud parties. I had simply gone to Samuel's office, shaken his hand, and thanked him for seeing the potential in a young lawyer when his own family only saw a shadow. I dressed meticulously, draped my dark coat over my arm, and took a taxi to the main ceremonial courthouse downtown. The ceremonial courtroom is one of the most breathtaking spaces in the city. It features massive, vaulted ceilings with intricate plasterwork, towering stained glass windows that cast colorful geometric patterns across the polished mahogany floors, and rows of heavy oak pews designed to hold hundreds of people. When I walked through the heavy double doors, the room was already packed to absolute capacity. The low hum of excited conversation filled the grand space. I walked slowly down the center aisle, and my chest swelled with an emotion so powerful it threatened to steal the breath right out of my lungs. I looked at the faces turning to smile at me. In the front row, wearing his own heavy robes, sat Chief Justice Samuel. He gave me a slow, deeply proud nod, his sharp eyes crinkling at the corners. Sitting right next to him was Judge Christopher, who stood up and offered me a warm, firm handshake as I passed by. Behind them sat dozens of my colleagues, former clerks, defense attorneys I had sparred with, and prosecutors I had mentored. Every single person in that massive, brightly lit room was there because they respected my mind, my integrity, and my unwavering commitment to the truth. They were there because I had earned my place among them through sheer grit and substance. I looked at the designated section for family seating. It was completely filled with my closest friends, my mentors, and the people who had actively chosen to support me. My biological mother was not there. My biological father was not there. And Elijah, the golden child who had spent his entire life trying to ensure I remained invisible, was completely absent. They had not been invited. They had not been informed. For all I knew, Elijah was still sleeping on their living room sofa, blaming the entire world for the consequences of his own disastrous actions. Some people outside looking in might call my decision to exclude them harsh. Some might say that a swearing-in ceremony is a family event, and that blood should always be forgiven. But standing there in the warmth of that courtroom, I knew the absolute truth. Family is not automatically proven by shared blood. Blood is merely a biological accident. Blood had been used against me as leverage, as a tool for manipulation, as an excuse for silence, and as a weapon of deep shame. True family is proven by absolute respect. It is proven by the people who tell the truth about you in rooms where lying would be much easier and far more profitable. True family is proven by the people who stand proudly beside you in the light, without ever once asking you to shrink yourself down to make them feel comfortable. I walked up the wooden steps to the raised platform. The bailiff called the massive room to order. The entire crowd stood up in perfect, respectful unison. The rustling of fabric echoed against the vaulted ceilings. Chief Justice Samuel stepped forward, holding the heavy leather-bound Bible. I placed my left hand firmly on the worn cover and raised my right hand high into the air. I looked out over the crowd one last time, my eyes locking with Samuel's. I took a deep, steadying breath. "I, Joshua," I began, my voice ringing out clear, strong, and unwavering, bouncing off the mahogany walls. "Do solemnly swear that I will administer justice without respect to persons, and do equal right to the poor and to the rich." As I spoke the ancient, heavy words of the oath, I thought about that tiny, drafty table by the kitchen doors at the Union Club. I thought about how incredibly hard my brother had worked to make me disappear into the background. And I thought about the profound, undeniable irony of it all. In his desperate, cowardly attempt to erase me from his world, the only person he had successfully, permanently erased from that world was himself. When the oath was finished, the entire courtroom erupted into deafening applause. I put on the heavy black robe of a senior appellate judge, the dark fabric settling onto my shoulders like a perfectly fitted armor. I smiled, a genuine, completely unburdened smile, and stepped forward into the brightest chapter of my life. Before we end this video, I want to take a moment to talk directly to you about what we can all learn from this journey. Family is a word that carries an immense amount of emotional weight in our society, but it should never, ever be used as a heavy chain to hold you down, or as a weapon to diminish your inherent worth. We are so often conditioned to believe that we must endure toxic behavior, manipulation, and disrespect simply because someone happens to share our bloodline. But the honest truth is, mutual respect is the absolute foundation of any real, healthy relationship. If someone demands that you shrink yourself, hide your accomplishments, or deny your reality just so they can feel bigger, they do not truly love you. They are only using you as a prop in their own play. Setting strict, immovable boundaries is not an act of cruelty. It is a profound act of deep self-respect. You always have the absolute right to gracefully walk away from tables where respect is no longer being served. I hope my story gives you the courage to stand tall in your own truth, no matter who tries to hide you in the shadows. What is the one lesson or takeaway that resonated with you the most from my story? Please share your thoughts in the comments below, or simply comment the word "good," so I know you appreciate the lessons the story brought to light.